Hey there, friends. Davey here. Hey, before we dive into this conversation, I want to share with you an incredible opportunity for pastors, ministry leaders, counselors, and really any of you who want to better understand trauma and how to help those who are hurting. Our very own coaching director, Teresa Glantz, is launching another cohort of her course, the Biblical Trauma Care Specialist course, beginning the first week of April. This course has, every time she's launched it, it's sold out. It is an unbelievable resource to help you as you're guiding other people through this pathway as they're learning how trauma has affected them and what the Bible has to say about that and how they really ultimately heal from whatever they've experienced. This is a 10-session live Zoom course where you'll gain a deeper understanding of trauma, what it is, how it impacts people, and how you can guide someone toward healing and restoration through a biblical lens. That's the differentiator. It's not just through a clinical lens, but this is the biblical meets the clinical. This course is not just learning. It's not just a learning experience. It is also the first step in becoming a certified trauma coach, either with Nothing is Wasted or in your own business. Yes, we are actually certifying coaches now through Nothing is Wasted, and this course would be the first step. This is a certification that equips you to serve in a variety of settings, including your local church, ministry, or counseling practice, or maybe you're a first responder or someone on the front lines of the medical field, and you just want to know how to help people in the middle of the trauma that they're experiencing. We know that pain is a part of life, and many of you are already on the front lines, witnessing the trauma and heartache faced by those in your churches and communities. And this course is designed to empower you to step into those painful places with confidence, offering tools, hope, and healing that's grounded in God's Word. So don't miss out on this life-changing opportunity. Visit nothingiswasted.com/BTCS. Again, nothingiswasted.com/BTCS, which stands for Biblical Trauma Care Specialists, to learn more and reserve your spot today. You can also go to the link in the show notes or right below this YouTube video if you're watching on YouTube. Listen, I want to invite you to be a part of this next cohort of the Biblical Trauma Care Specialist course, and let's together bring hope and healing to a hurting world. Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to the Nothing is Wasted podcast. My name is Davey, and I'm your host for today. And I am so grateful that you are joining us this week on the Nothing is Wasted podcast. Here at Nothing is Wasted, we want to meet you in your pain and provide you a pathway through, because there is a pathway through your pain. And so we are thrilled to have you here listening in on very inspiring stories about people who are going through difficult things, but God's showing up to intervene in their stories and interact in their stories. And we're hoping that as you hear these stories, that you also begin to see where God is interacting and intervening in your own story, and you derive a lot of encouragement from it, a lot of hope, a lot of healing. And so we're just grateful that you're joining us today. We have an incredible conversation with our dear friend Annie F. Downs and her sister Tatum Green. This is a unique conversation because we are interviewing both of them. And the reason we're interviewing both of them is because Annie and Tatum wrote together a book called Where Did TJ Go? A book for kids on grief and loss. A book for kids on grief and loss. And they wrote this, you'll hear quite a bit of the story as we dive into this conversation, but they wrote this as a way to help Tatum's son, Sam, process through the loss of his little baby brother, TJ. TJ was born with significant health issues and only lived for 56 days. And this project was an effort to help Sam, as well as other families who are grieving the loss of a child, process through in a way that's gospel-centered. And, we're always looking for incredible resources to help kids as they're processing through grief. Kids process grief way differently than adults do. It is, it's a unique way for them to metabolize what has gone on in their life. And often as parents, we can be overwhelmed and we feel ill-equipped to help our kids process through this. So that's why Annie F. Downs and Tatum Green wrote this book. Telling you, it's an incredible book. This is an incredible conversation. Annie, if you want to go back and listen to our original conversation with her, she was on episode 35 of the Nothing is Wasted podcast, so early on in the Nothing is Wasted podcast days. And Annie has been quite the, not just pioneer, but also quite the mentor and example for those of us in the podcast industry. She hosts the That Sounds Fun podcast and is also the director of the That Sounds Fun network, which is a network of lots of podcasts. And then she also is the author of multiple bestsellers, including That Sounds Fun, Remember God, and 100 Days to Be Brave. So if you haven't gotten to know Annie F. Downs, you definitely need to, and you're going to get to know her and her sister a little bit in this conversation. Before we dive in, I want to remind you of the 5 steps to taking back your story Zoom call that I do about once a month. So if you're looking to take a first step or a next step in your healing journey, I want to invite you to be a part of that call. It happens again about once a month. You can go to nothingiswasted.com/start here to find out when the next one is and to register for that. Nothingiswasted.com/start here. It is a live Zoom call. It's not a webinar, so we actually interact. We leave time for Q&A, but it's just a great sacred time for us to spend together, where I'll introduce to you what I believe are 5 steps to taking back your story, no matter what you've gone through. And then we'll also show you some of the resources and tools that we have as a ministry that may be able to help you along your healing journey. Nothingiswasted.com/start here. Okay, let's go ahead and dive into my conversation with Annie F. Downs and Tatum Green. Well, guys, welcome to the Nothing is Wasted podcast. Annie, welcome back. Tatum, welcome.
Thank
For the
you.
first time. This is so great to have you guys on.
So glad to be here, Davey. I love chatting with you, man. So this is fun.
Oh my goodness. Well, okay, so we're gonna kind of take this in pieces a little bit, having both of you guys on here. Annie, our community is going to know who you are because they will probably have listened to you on some platform, but aren't on the Nothing is Wasted podcast, episode 35. So why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are, Tatum? Then you follow up, tell us a little bit about who you are, and then we're going to dive into this book and your story and all the things that you guys are carrying right now.
Yeah, in this scenario, I'm the older sister and I'm the aunt. Those are the 2 things that are true about what we are talking about today. But I've been writing books and traveling, speaking at conferences, events in churches, and had a podcast. And I've been doing this as my full-time job for 14 years. Is that math right? Yeah, 14 years. And yeah, I'm just, sometimes, Davey, as we get into this, you'll get this, but sometimes I wonder if everything has led up to this, if this is the story that God saw all along and went like, let's build some scaffolding for a time when we can give a lot of families a lot of hope. So that's who I am, and this is my sister Tatum.
Wow.
Hi,
Tatum,
I'm
go ahead.
Tatum.
Yeah.
My husband and I are in full-time ministry. We work with Christian missions and training. And we have a 4-year-old son named Sam, who is our miracle boy, who followed years of miscarriages and failed fertility treatments. And then he just spontaneously came as a miracle surprise. So we're so super grateful for him. And we are also the parents of TJ, our youngest son, who this book that we're going to talk about today is all about. And yeah.
Wow. Well, I'll say a couple things. Annie, I'll say this. Your entire ministry is not just led up to this moment. There's been so much scaffolding for all kinds of impact. But I do understand what you're saying, because this is a really pivotal moment, because there's so many families who are dealing with multiple levels of grief, whether it be the same kind of thing that you guys have walked through, or if it's something different. And I know that everything that you're going to say today and what you have been carrying is going to be so helpful to these families. Why don't you, this is a deeply personal project for you guys. Where did TJ go is the name of the book, a book for kids on grief and loss, which I'm so grateful for, because there's a limited amount of resources out there for kids and helping parents as they're helping kids. Talk to us a little bit about what led up to this. Why did you write this book?
Yeah, you start, Tatum, and then I'll say my part.
Sounds good. Okay, so as I previously mentioned, we have one son who's 4. We had 4 miscarriages before him and a failed IVF, and then we had our miracle boy. And when he was just 15 months old, we found out we were pregnant with TJ. But just 12 weeks into that pregnancy, we found out that he had a pretty severe genetic abnormality that was a life-limiting diagnosis. It's always fatal. And so as I was, grappling with that grief and that reality myself, I was also thinking of Sam and how do we walk a 2-year-old through losing his little brother and what that will mean for the rest of his life now. And how can we give him language now as a 2-year-old to understand the pain and the disappointment and the grief of it, but to also understand the hope that we have in Jesus, and that his baby brother is taken care of, and that we have an eternal hope. So I called my sister, who was an author, and I said, hey, I've been looking for a book like this. I cannot find a book like this.
Right.
My therapist had recommended, like, hey, you should read a book. So I was like, okay, let me figure out a book. But there are a couple of books that are sweet, but there was nothing that fit the message we wanted Sam to get.
Yeah, so what I did, Davey, is I just started calling my counselor friends, my pastor friends, and a couple of different moms who had led their other children through grief in the midst of a loss of a child. And so, and like Tam said, there were a couple of recommendations, but there was not a gospel story. And in grief, in these particular situations, we actually, this is going to sound like a funny word, but we actually had a real advantage of, we knew for weeks and months before TJ's birth and death that tragedy was probably coming unless God intervened the way we wanted him to. A lot of families need a book right now because something tragic happened today that they could not have prepped for. And that book has not existed for people who want to talk about the hope of heaven in the midst of great tragedy. And so what I did, Davey, I wasn't trying to write a book that anybody published. In fact, I've written 2 other kids' books that are gifts to families that have never been published. It's just a way I gift sometimes. And I just don't make casseroles, right? Like, I don't do casseroles, I do stories. And so I really wrote Where Did TJ Go as a gift to Sam. And because we were, as a family, trying to figure out, how do we have the advantage of having 7 months to prepare him for what might happen. And so a couple of weeks before TJ was born, I was driving from Franklin, Tennessee to Nashville, Tennessee. And Davey, what I'll say to you is it just felt like a story downloaded into my brain. And I just started telling that story into my phone as I was driving, just like sobbing and driving the 10 days, 2 weeks before TJ's birth. And I got back to my house, I typed it up and separated it into pages on a Word document. And I stole clip art from the internet and I put it on the pages. And then I took it to the local print shop and I printed a copy and laminated it and bound it for Tatum and her family and one for my parents. Wow. And that, for real, Davey, that's what we thought the book was going to do. We thought that was it. And after TJ, so in the book, TJ dies at the hospital because that's what we thought was going to happen and what we were preparing Sam for. What actually ended up happening because of God's kindness and medical intervention is that TJ lived 56 days. So 3 weeks in ICU, 5 weeks in full-time hospice care at Tatum and Jacob's house, which, as you can imagine, is just a trauma in and of itself. It's a gift and a trauma, as many things are. And so after
full-time hospice care was actually, we were his full-time.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
He was on hospice, but we were his medical.
Yeah. And so after TJ's death is when Tatum and Jacob started reading the book to Sam. It's why she's the co-author, Davey, because she'd be like, hey, this part isn't good. And this part is, you've used too many words. Sam's bored in the middle of the book. And so I asked her to help me make it better, because then what I did is I sent it to my agent and I just said, hey, I know this is like the most niche book for kids. It's also about death, so it's not the most fun. Would you just see if the publisher would consider making this available to families, because we needed it. 1 in 4 families has a miscarriage, Davey. That is 25% of our friends are experiencing death of a child in their family. Right. And that's not including stillborn or medical decisions or sickness after birth like we experienced. And so then the publisher, Revell, was just like, yes, this is a need and we see it. And so they took the story I wrote for Sam and made it a book that's available to anyone now.
Wow, man. There's so much underneath all of this stuff. Tatum, first of all, for all of you guys, but specifically, I'd love to hear from you on this. You get this news, you're now looking at, okay, I'm going to give birth to this baby. And more than likely, barring a massive miracle from the Lord, we're also going to bury this baby. Yeah. What is that like to experience that news and then to make the conscious decision, like, okay, we're gonna walk this thing out?
Yeah. The word that I use the most often is it's just really complicated.
Yeah.
It felt very complicated, very heavy. It was really challenging. I think that, we knew from the beginning that we wanted to give the Lord every chance possible to perform a miracle because we believe he could. So, it was, we were constantly holding this tension of, this is what the doctors are saying. This is what we're seeing on ultrasounds. This is what we know based on genetic blood tests. But we believe that God can change it in an instant. And so I actually leaned on my community a lot for them to believe that for me. I had some very best friends who, right when we got the diagnosis, 3 of my best friends fasted for a week, just believing that God could turn this thing around. And so I leaned heavily on my people to carry the hope of a miracle for me, while just somehow preparing my heart to, and simultaneously, because I had had 4 miscarriages, I had been through, some times with Jesus about this and what this looks like to walk with him in this kind of deep pain and disappointment and grief. And one of the truths he led me to in that was that every day I was pregnant with TJ, there was an eternal being growing inside of me who was part of me. And that I could be grateful for that day. Because there's not really much you can do about tomorrow.
Yeah.
And with his diagnosis, 95%, something like 95% of babies with this diagnosis don't make it to birth. And after that, the statistics just go, it's like hours, days, weeks. We were incredibly fortunate to have 56 days with him, to see his little face change from a little tiny newborn to a 2-month-old, and to see Sam interact with him. But yeah, it was really hard. It was really, really hard. And we were very fortunate to have people around us who loved us and carried us. We had an incredible medical team. The care team that took care of me, that took care of TJ and NICU, were just the greatest gift to us. And our family who stepped in, my family, my husband's family, who stepped in and cared for us, like put their lives on hold for weeks. Annie was down in Atlanta for weeks. My other sister took off work for weeks. My in-laws came from California and were with us for, I think my mother-in-law was there for 6 of TJ's 8 weeks, and then came back for his funeral. We were just very fortunate.
Wow. Any often in loss like this, obviously most attention is pointed to, in this case, your sister, right? But there's also around the community around you, you're also experiencing this, as well as trying to support, and, you're riding that line and that tension of your own feelings of grief, as well as on some level trying to kind of compartmentalize that so you can be there for what was that like for you, especially in terms of the peaks and troughs of hope, and God he's going to pull this thing through, and I want to believe that. And yet at the same time, I also, I'm looking at this reality. I'm not sure. I want to prepare my heart. How is that for you as you're walking adjacent to Tatum in this?
For 55 nights, I said to Jesus, he's still here. You could change this.
Yeah.
Right. So, that was complicated too for me. Right. But I'll tell you, Davey, one of the gifts of my personality is I'm pretty good at compartmentalizing in emergencies. Like, it's actually one of the best things about me, if I'm allowed to list the best things about me.
I just got to watch it before we came on air. I got to watch you just move.
That's
you
right.
You were the Matrix right there.
I can. And so it really, so a tiny example is I used to teach elementary school. And one time a kid in the classroom across the hall got hit. It was the last day of school. He was stacking his chair. He got hit in the head and it started to bleed. And the teacher could not handle blood. And the kids knew to come get me. Right? Because I may not love that stuff, but in an emergency, I'm the one you want to call. And so for me, it was it was kind of where I am, one of the places I'm most gifted is to step
Totally.
in. And the other reality, the difference between me and the rest of our family, Davey, is everyone else lives in Atlanta. And I was going to work in Nashville for 3 to 4 days a week and then driving down for the weekend in Atlanta and stepping in and doing what I could do best when I was there. And then I got to eject. Tatum didn't leave her house for 5 weeks or something.
Right.
And I was in and out. So because of all that, Davey, I had a unique seat in the ability to breathe in and breathe out of the day-to-day of the grief. I mean, it was never far from my mind, obviously, and we were FaceTiming all the time and making phone calls all the time and managing. I was managing the Caring Bridge. I was
She managed
managing
everything. She managed my whole life.
right. So because of that, there was a little bit of like, for better or for worse, my counselor would say for better and for worse, I was able to go like turn off the depth of this and turn on being who you can be in this helpful time. And it's something we've gotten to say to a couple different people, Davey, is like, we need people who could sit with Tatum in the grief the whole time and who could just like cry with her and talk with her. And you also need people who can play with the 2-year-old and need people who can, I mean, you remember this profoundly, Davey, is you needed people who could come take your son, right? As a son, come take your son, go to the playground, go to a movie, go to church. And while there were other people who make really great casseroles and other people who really go deep in your sadness, and that's not my gifting. I can do those if I need to. I can make a casserole. I can sit with you. But what I'm gifted in is coming in and going like, what can I do to get everyone else around the person to get a break and to walk? I mean, and I did it for Tatum too, where I was like, okay, every Wednesday, this one friend is coming to your house and she's going to be there. I mean, Amy's going to be there every Wednesday. And so scheduling some of that as well, Davey. So, but you cannot avoid grief. You cannot push it down far enough or fling it far enough that it will not boomerang back into your life. And so I still dealt with it with my counselor and dealt with it in my own way and in my own life and in my own sadness. And so, so it was still real to me, but my gifting really served us in that season.
Wow. And I think that's an important thing that you're bringing up, because so often people are asking the question, what should I do? What should I not do? And I feel like we give kind of this blanket advice oftentimes, which it's good, but it may be surface level. Like, hey, don't try to solve or resolve someone's pain. Sit with them, be with them, ministry of presence. But to actually drill down a little bit more and go, what are you uniquely gifted to do in these situations? Can bring even more. It's like it brings a robustness around the kingdom of God and how the kingdom wraps their arms around people who are grieving.
I mean, we loved people. We had a meal train, and it was for lunches and dinners. And then people would show up with breakfast and say, "Here you go," and walk away. Wow. We're like, man, what a great, we forgot to even ask for breakfast. Yeah. And so it was things like, and Davey, I remember when a friend at our church had a tragedy, and one of our friends just went to Target and made like gift baskets for the 3 sons in the family and just left them on the porch and texted and said, I got stuff for each of your kids on the porch, right? Like Frisbees and soccer balls and coloring books, and like, lean into your gifting because someone else isn't leaning into your gifting. But if you are the person that can sit there and be the gift of presence, do that. What an honor. What a beautiful thing you're offering. If you're the person who can buy a bunch of stuff and leave it at the house and give the kids some games and take over some Chick-fil-A biscuits, be that person too.
Wow. Man, so that's so profound, so insightful, and liberating, I think, for a lot of people who are hearing that. They're like, oh, I don't have to be something that I'm not. I can just step in who God's created me to be. Wow. Tatum, I'm really curious about this too, because we have some friends right now who are battling, they've gone through multiple miscarriages, IVF, and they're in this season where they're going, do I give up on hope with this? You went through and have gone through quite a season with this. What has kept you going, we're going to keep coming back to this and approaching it with hope and trust in the Lord ultimately? How do you keep showing up with that kind of perseverance?
That's a great question. And it was a total of 4 years between our first miscarriage and when Sam was born. So in the world of infertility and loss, it was, in the big scheme of things, our season was short. It did not feel short. It is so hard the complete lack of control you have over the greatest dream of your heart is so hard. And, you know, honestly, like Davey, I feel like I don't even really have an answer for you, because we had, it's actually very frustrating to say this out loud, but we had kind of given up when we got pregnant with Sam. And then we got pregnant with Sam, which everybody tells you to stop thinking about it, which is why I don't, I was actually like, okay, Lord, really? You're going to do it this way?
Yeah.
But, because
Can I have another story to tell so that I can,
yeah, so that I can't validate when people say,
Yeah.
just stop thinking about it. But even, you know, we did we had just had a failed IVF. The doctor said, you know, we could do everything over again, but we would likely get the same results. It's all just a fluke, but this is where y'all are at. And he said, so throw away the supplements, eat whatever you want, love the people around you. And he wasn't a believer, but he knew we were. And he was like, and maybe the big guy upstairs will help you out. And a couple months later, I mean, that's exactly what we did. We said to each other, we're like, let's just like not even think about it for a few months, and then we'll like circle back and see what we feel like God is saying. And in that time we got pregnant with Sam, which was like a crazy miracle. And I actually like felt super guilty at first. I called my mom crying like a teenager who got pregnant, because I felt like we had put our family through so much pain already. And now I went and got pregnant again, and there's really only two outcomes that happened there. And we had only lived one. And so I kind of feel like I don't really have a great answer, because
Well, Davey, I also kind of sit in the same seat as a 44-year-old unmarried woman who hasn't gotten to have children either. Right. And so my encouragement would be, a thing that I've worked through a lot is the question you can ask yourself, and that your friends can ask themselves, is, what are you hoping for? Are you hoping to parent? Are you hoping to raise children? Are you hoping to birth children? Are you hoping to have children in your home? And as you really dial down on what you're hoping for, it teaches you what to grieve and what to pursue.
Hey, friend, whether you've been a faithful listener to the Nothing is Wasted podcast or you've just found us, I know the stories that we share here of people walking through trauma, tragedy, and major life transition can be extremely inspirational. One of the threads I hope that you see is that these people who have or are walking through pain on the podcast haven't just settled for the hurt that they've experienced. They believe that even in the midst of all their suffering, there is a way forward, that God has something more for them than just pain. And they also see the agency they have in their own lives to partner with God to take back their stories. It's that same kind of hope, the hope of real people walking through real valleys while experiencing real healing, that our Pain to Purpose course offers. We've guided now hundreds of people just like you through all sorts of pain points and have helped them find hope and purpose through it, even in the midst of it. And we have countless stories of the way God has brought healing to people through the Pain to Purpose course, but I want you to hear this one from Katie.
I realized that based on past hurt from just different Christian leaders that I had encountered because I grew up in church, that a lot of what they did to me, I was projecting onto God. So the Pain to Purpose course helped me to realize that I had a distorted view of God. It was a great moment because I got to realize that and then work to reframe my perspective of God.
Maybe you need help like Katie did in reframing your perspective on who God is after what you've been through, or perhaps you need to learn how to even begin to identify your hurt and how it's impacting your life right now. No matter where you are, the Pain to Purpose course will give you the tools to heal and find hope. You can sign up for the Pain to Purpose course at course.nothingiswasted.com. Again, course.nothingiswasted.com, or click the links below or in the show notes if you're listening to this on a podcast platform. There you will have access to all the course videos and everything you need to start moving forward from pain into purpose. You don't have to wait another second to start the journey towards healing and wholeness. Go to course.nothingiswasted.com.
And so I think it's important to ask yourself which of those is what you're actually hoping for, because I found a ton of freedom in going like, that's actually not what I'm hoping for. This is what I was hoping for. Okay, how can I pursue what I'm actually hoping for? And it almost releases God from these ropes I'd tied around him of not meeting my expectations. And then I went, sorry, I actually didn't That's not the part I wanted. I'm sorry. Okay, and it also allows me to grieve I mean, I remember when my counselor, when I turned 40, and she said, you need to grieve that you will never be a wife or a mom in your 20s or 30s. And I was like, oh yeah, that's actually a door that locks behind me.
Wow.
And the hope of that I need to let go of. And so it teaches you what to grieve and what to pursue.
Wow. And one of the things that we, in my own journey, as I'm like talking with a lot of people who are going through varying different types of grief journeys.
It must be all the time, Davey.
Yeah.
All the time. But one of the things I'm noticing as a common thread is that underneath all of it, right, God has these plans of us becoming more like the person of Jesus in the midst of this suffering.
Yeah.
And this is what Peter said, right? He said, I want to share in his resurrection. First, I must share in his suffering. And so in the suffering, regardless of what our pain point is, whatever variety of suffering we're walking through, we're learning to become more like Jesus, and we're learning how to be tethered to him alone.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's these things that we hope for, these moments, these circumstances that we're putting our hope in. And we only realize that once we don't have, or once we're without, or once we've lost.
Yeah.
And I'm curious for you guys each, what has God shown you? This is a big question. So, and I want to get to the book. So please.
Oh, this is exactly what we want to talk
what has
about.
God shown you each about him? Like, what has he revealed more about his character and nature in this that might not otherwise, you may not have otherwise seen it if you had not been walking through this?
Yeah, I think he's gotten more complicated for me.
That's a valid answer.
Yeah, I think it is. The older I get and the more variety of tragedies we experience on earth, the less I understand him as the guy with the big white beard and the white robe sitting on a throne and responding to what I ask exactly. And so I think that's really good and really helpful, is that tragedy complicates your feelings and your thoughts about God without it, in your best days, without it changing the truth of who he is. So scripture doesn't change. What the scripture says about him doesn't change. Slow to anger, abounding in love, compassionate, all that is still true. It's just like the kaleidoscope, I turned it 2 more times, and there were dark parts I hadn't seen before. There's not darkness in God, but in my view, there were things I hadn't seen before. And so that's probably what's been true to me, is it felt like he got more mysterious and more complicated. And that is probably really good when it comes to a relationship I'm going to be in for eternity.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. And I think, even as you're talking about what like suffering does in your heart toward the Lord, I remember even as we were waiting, my husband and I, we in a moment of strength said, God, whatever way you get the most glory, that's what we want our family to look like. And on my good days, being able to say, what an honor it is that I get to trust him with this thing I care about the most in the world that I have no control over.
Wow.
It's a way to connect my heart to his character and eternity, that I do think doesn't come in any other way.
Wow.
How would you answer that, Davey?
Well, I mean, for me, I would say exactly what you guys are talking about. I love the fact that God has grown more mysterious, which prompts the fact that I've got to bring my difficult questions to him.
Yes.
That this is really where you find the true riches of journeying with Jesus. This becomes a lot less of the transactional Christianity. This is the real, true relationship where you're wrestling with God, and out of that, he's revealing to you he is much kinder than what you ever thought he would be, and whatever you gave him, however much you gave him credit for. And so I think, and all of the attributes, he just becomes more and more the fullness of all these attributes that you knew from a head knowledge to where you're really experiencing it. And I resonate with what you said there, Tatum, this idea of like, you've got this moment of strength. It's like this fleeting moment where it feels like it is not you. It is a supernatural takeover in that moment where you go, that feels like the truest and realest thing I have ever experienced. And I'm going to hold on to that as an anchor. And I don't even know why because the rest of the time my feelings are not lining up with that. But that right there becomes my anchor. And then every time I start to deviate from that, I'm coming right back to that. I'm remembering that moment right there, because that was the moment that God showed up and was incarnate with me in that moment, right? The manifest presence of God. So we ask these questions of explanation all the time. Why God? Why God? Why God? Right? And God gives us something even greater than explanation. He gives us incarnation.
Yeah.
Hey,
He walks
say
with
that.
us.
So good.
Yes.
And that reminded me too, one of the things I feel like that I've learned, especially since TJ's death, is that I think a lot of times in the church, because we grew up in church. I've been following Jesus my whole life. I've been in Christian ministry and missions most of my adult life. And I think that it's very easy to think that what it looks like to follow Jesus in the most mature way is to just trust his goodness and have faith and believe that, like, my baby is with Jesus and and I can just trust him in that, and that is the most mature version of faith. But I think what I'm discovering in the midst of discovering is the deepest, intimate, mature version of faith is going to him with my raw, trusting him with my raw frustration and anger and disappointment and confusion, and gratitude and thankfulness. Just the raw me, trusting that he'll accept me with all of that, with my mess, and saying, I don't like this. I do not like the way this turned out. And I'm going to just hold on to you and keep trusting you. I have nowhere else to go.
Right.
But it's been really, that's been a really interesting thing in the wake of TJ's death specifically, is trying to exercise this muscle of true intimacy with him. Looks like going to him with those real deep questions and not just like pulling myself up by my bootstraps to have faith.
Yeah, and I also think it's really important to say that if this is a real relationship you're in, there is ebbs and flows. And there are seasons that are easier and harder. And it is super okay if you're in relationship with God, but it is like roommates, not lovers, right? I mean, there are going to be seasons where that is true, but you didn't move to a different house. You kept living in that house and kept living in that room. And so I think when you have seasons of grief, what I have experienced is that you're going to have profound grief in the moment. And then you're going to have I've had this weird residual anger grief at random points in the last 3 years. And those can last longer than the week after TJ's death. And those can be more like, hey, I know you're here. I'm going to sit and read my Bible because I'm committed to the disciplines that make me who I want to be and that increase my love of God and my pursuit of God. I am committed to my Christian community. I'm not thrilled right now, but I also have a lot to do. And therefore, we will deal with this soon. It's one of the reasons I think Sabbath matters so much, Davey, is on my Saturdays when the rest of my life is quiet is when we go there. But on a Tuesday when we're talking about a new book and I'm, my family's staying in my apartment and it is a busy week. You don't necessarily get to deep dive into the sadness, just like it's true in your marriages. You don't get to deep dive the sadness when the kids have a band concert tonight and tomorrow morning you have to leave early for a wrestling tournament. But there will come a time in a committed relationship where you go, now is the right time for us to really talk about this thing because we are committed to each other and we need to be right with each other. And I think that is really true in my relationship with God too.
Wow. I'm having so many conversations right now with ministry leaders, pastors, and this is the thing we keep hovering around is not only is the church like the body of Christ, right? The church, are we creating spaces as the church where people can do this, where they can be angry at God, where they can bring these questions? Also, are we, as the institution of the church, as the local church, the expressions of the local church body in all of our communities, are we creating spaces where people can do this? Because this is such a pivotal, to your point, Tatum, this is where the depth of our relationship is forged. This is where the spiritual formation actually happens. And this is the soil that we have to continue to cultivate if we're going to help people understand who God is and that there is a personal relationship invitation for them.
Yeah, I mean, are we teaching that we are the bride of Christ and therefore in a committed married relationship with the God of the universe that requires some complicated conversations? I mean, are we making space for that? Davey, you know this. I've said this to you privately and probably publicly. I love how you pastor. I just think you're one of the finest pastors we have. And you do this. I mean, you make space for people to grieve and to sit. And the long gift of nothing is wasted is you go like, hey, you don't have to be better in a year.
Yeah.
And you don't have to be better in a month. You've got the rest of your life. Just do not give up on God.
Yeah.
Don't walk away from the committed relationship, but allow it to have complicated seasons. Every relationship does. I'm not in a relationship with friends, family, or dudes that does not have complicated seasons.
Right.
And so let that be true. Just don't leave the relationship over your disappointment.
Hi friend, I wanted to share with you one of my favorite resources from Nothing is Wasted. It's the Pain to Purpose 42-day devotional. This devotional is a beautiful 42-day journey through life's valleys with biblically based encouragement to help you or someone you love navigate the difficulties of life. Each week, you'll learn from the journey of a major character in Scripture and reflect on how that impacts your own story and whatever you are facing. From Job to David, from Ruth to Jesus himself, you'll see how God has taken the most dire of circumstances and brought healing and redemption from the ashes. This devotional makes a great gift for the person who's walking through a recent loss or trauma, or who carries the wounds from pain in their past. It's something that you can keep on hand to give to someone who is experiencing any kind of pain point, and is a great addition to your daily time with the Lord. For just $25, you can get one for yourself or gift it to a friend. For our Nothing is Wasted podcast listeners, we want to offer you 20% off your entire order with a coupon code PODCAST in all caps. Grab a copy today of the Pain to Purpose 42-day devotional at nothingiswasted.com/devo. Be encouraged by it yourself or encourage someone else in their journey through life's valleys.
Let me ask a few questions around helping Sam with this, because that's where a lot of, I mean, again, we're having conversations with parents all the time going, oh my goodness, what? And people ask me all the time, how did you help Weston? And I'm like, I have no idea. Like, talk to me in 20 years. I'm strong. But I would just be very curious, especially you guys were getting some real-time feedback. You're reading this book to him and you're seeing what light bulbs are going off and where there's not any light bulbs going off. So that may be just a placeholder, you know, in a microcosm of what really also was going on as you guys were helping walk him through this. But talk to me a little bit about this. How did you guys try to even figure out where to start walking him through this?
Yeah, we were encouraged early on to be, you know, we did have the gift of time to have conversations leading up to TJ's birth and leading up to his death. And we were encouraged to be as honest as possible with Sam in an age appropriate way. He turned 2 just after TJ was born. And I know he's my own, but he's very smart. And he is really communicative. Like, he was already saying full sentences and all kinds of things. So we tried to be we tried to explain it to him in as honest a way as possible as what was probably going to happen, what that would look like in our family. And then as we got the gift of this book, it really has been fun to see him. Like the other day he said, after we had read it, you know, because we just got the physical copy for the first time, like this version, you know, like a month ago, we held it for the first time. And so he wanted to read it right away, and we did. And then later he said, Mama, do you think there's playgrounds in heaven? And so just like sparking his imagination. And I love that he asked that, because obviously he's a 4-year-old boy. The boy loves a playground, right? Yep. And so he's getting the message that heaven is a good place.
Yes.
And that it is a place that is full of joy and full of fun and things that you love, and that's where his baby brother is.
Wow.
Yeah, one of the things, Davey, that's been really interesting since we've been talking about the book is the DMs I get from people who say, my husband died this year. Can we read this to our kids? Their grandmother died. Wow. Can we read this to this morning was my cousin died by suicide, and my kids saw his truck in the driveway and have been wondering if he walked to heaven.
Yeah.
right? And so what we get to say back to families is, while this is a story of the death of an infant, we spend a lot of time in heaven in this book, and in the gift of children and the gift to us as adults when we sit in stories like this is there's a whole page about a zoo in heaven, and TJ's riding a giraffe, and it makes space for kids to go, is there a zoo in heaven? And what do we get to ride? And what animal would you, if heaven let you ride an animal, if that's part of what we get to do, what are you going to ride? You know, and it gives you this middle thing. Because, Davey, one of the things that the two of you know, you and Tatum know very profoundly that I do not know, is the amount of grieving you're having to doing at the loss of your spouse and child and your child while you are parenting a grieving child. I mean, that is beyond what I know how to do. It's such a depth of maturity that y'all have to, and a depth of grief. And so our hope was, can we put a book in hands that allows an aunt to read it or a grandparent to read it, or when the parent is ready to have a conversation, when the kid's ready to have a conversation. The book is one of the things David Thomas, who's a therapist, a family therapist from Raising Boys and Girls, he wrote a letter in the back of the book to help parents kind of process, because we're not the experts on that part. We're like, please come help us. But one of the things he says a lot is be actual and factual. And so in the book, we say, TJ died. Yeah. We didn't do this like TJ floated and became an angel. No, TJ died. But we want kids to understand that a death on earth is not the disappearing of a person. They are somewhere. They just are not here. There's a bigger story we don't know. And so to me, it mattered a ton when we're thinking about Sam and other kids and families, that there's this opportunity, no matter who's passed away in your family, that this book allows for some imaginative dreaming about heaven and what questions and thoughts you might have about heaven as a real place. I mean, one of the things, here's a little Easter egg about the book. One of the things is we didn't do the streets in gold. And we didn't do the streets in gold on purpose, even though scripture's really clear that is true. And a parent can say, hey, do you know the difference between what you see at this zoo in heaven or what you see where Sam and TJ are riding bikes, is the streets are actually made of gold. But we wanted it to feel like a real place to the kids. And there are things about heaven that are unbelievable.
It feels almost abstract to a kid, for sure.
And so we were like, no, let's just make the ground out of dirt. That's fine. That's totally fine. Because we wanted Sam to see that TJ was somewhere that makes sense. And so we hope that no matter who has passed away in your family, that there's opportunity. And then at the end, Davey, it mattered to me that Sam was sad in the end of the book. Because we want to model for people, you can know the truth of heaven and still be sad.
Wow.
And you can hold both of those things. And so no matter who's passed away in your family, it is fair and good and right to go, man, I'm so glad they're in heaven, and man, I wish they were here.
Oh,
and that is okay.
That's so good. I'm so glad, because you're shaping a worldview. You're giving permission here to hold these things in tension and say, hey, we know this is where we're longing to be. Our heart is fixed on eternity right here. Yes. And at the same time, these are some feelings that we have right now. And you're helping to shape little minds, little hearts that have trouble wrapping their minds and hearts around this in a way that's a lot more concrete for them. It's such a beautiful thing. Yeah. Yesterday I was sitting, go ahead, Tatum, I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, grown-ups have a hard time wrapping their mind around that.
Yeah, exactly. I was sitting yesterday. I went to a friends of ours she lost her dad, and so we were at a viewing. And I'm standing in front of this casket with Weston, my 10-year-old, who was 15 months old when his mom was taken. And I'm watching the wheels turn. He's looking at this open casket, and I know what's going on in his head. I know he's thinking, and he's connecting the dots. And I know that because of conversations we've had, and conversations that have been very difficult to steward. And yet, there are some times where, as Jesus says, faith like a child, a childlike faith, where he brings out some things that are so, yes, Annie, while it becomes more complex, there's also at the same time this simplicity that a child sees things through, where you go, that's the kingdom. That was profound. Oh my goodness. Have you guys had moments like that as you're walking through this and seeing this through Sam and going, oh my goodness, like, what has that been like for you to almost even take the complexity of this and go, you know what, here's some simple truths that really anchor us in this?
Yeah, I think that just, even when TJ was alive, we would stay up with him all night. One of us had to be awake with him all night long. And my last night shift with TJ, I was listening to a book about heaven, and just like I was letting myself imagine. And it was such an interesting thing holding him, knowing like he's going to be there
about to
very
go
soon. Like he
Yeah.
was.
I've never heard you tell this
Yeah.
before, Tatum.
He was like actively dying at this point, and so like imagining that this is where he was getting to go, and he was about to have these experiences that I haven't had yet, and that it's what we're all longing for and hoping for. And I know this isn't exactly answering the question that you answered, but I think giving myself that permission to imagine and dream, and trying to like help Sam get excited for what TJ is experiencing too. But like, I mean, I'm sure that you experienced this with Weston too, like, but also the trying to explain like, well, we aren't going to all go there right now. Like
Right.
the normal way that life happens is that you live a very long life, and when you're old when you die and go to heaven. But just the, just ushering him into imagining with me, like welcoming him into that. But he also, we read lots of different Bibles with him all the time, listen to mini BFF podcasts, lots of podcasts. But the other day he said to me, Mama, Jesus is in heaven, right? And I was like, yeah. And he goes, but the Bible says to run to him. I was like, oh.
Here we go.
Buddy. So yeah, I mean, like exactly what you're saying, like the simplicity of it.
Here we go.
That we make it so complicated, but
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say a simplicity that's not as sweet is that one of my big takeaways from TJ's life is that kids die. And I knew that was true because I'd been around it. Of course, we all have. We've all heard stories or experienced it. But then you kind of go like, oh, yeah, kids die. Okay. If kids die, then what does today matter to me? And what do I do today? Because if kids die and grown-ups die, then today's got to really matter. And everything I do has got to really matter. Now, are there days where I watch TV and waste 7 hours? Yeah, duh. Of course. I'm not saying like you're not allowed to have a day where you don't do anything that moves the kingdom power forward, right? That's what I'm saying. But I think one of the things God really needed me to understand is like none of this is promised. The thing that's promised is bigger and better and longer, and this is the short part of the story, but tomorrow is not promised to me. And so do I have a life that means it's okay if I'm done today?
Wow.
And I had never lived like that precisely. I'd lived like, let's have a great time, but I had never lived like, if today's it, are we good?
Yeah.
Have you done what you wanted to do as the best as you could today? And then every morning when you wake up, you go, oh, good. All right, we're going again. Great. We're going to go again. I want to live to be 100. I have real dreams of that because I love turning from 9 to 10 and going to double digits. So I've always been like, I only get one more shot at that. And that's 99 to 100. And so I've got a lot of work left and a lot of life and a lot of
years
eating healthy to do to make sure I get to be 100 as best I can control it. But I also am aware that we're not promised any of it. We're just promised Jesus. And that is what a gift that the promise is bigger than the thing we want, which is to live a long time.
Wow. So good. Well, I love what you guys have done here with this book, especially because what it's doing is it's opening up the conversation and it's allowing for more conversation to happen, which is really all that walking with a child through grief is just continuing to let the conversation happen and modeling for them that we can have that conversation with God. And that's what grief is.
That's right.
And so thank you guys for doing this. Thanks for spending some time with us. And where can we pick this up? Where can we find Where Did TJ Go? A book for kids on grief and loss.
So there's a couple of places. Anywhere you love to buy books. We always say start at your local bookstore because we love getting to walk into a local bookstore. And if they don't have it on their shelf, tell them to order 2 and you'll send a friend to buy the second one. So you can always get your local bookstore to order if they don't have it, but it's available everywhere you love to buy books. There's a couple of things we're doing, Davey, that I want to make sure our friends listening know. One thing that has happened that you have also profoundly experienced is there are a lot of organizations helping families through loss. And we have just been exposed. Well, we are exposed to.
They served our family.
So many that served our family 2 summers ago. But then as we've been talking about the book, we just see them tagged constantly. And so our publisher is being incredibly generous. And if you buy 25 copies or more, it's half price and free shipping. Because there were all these orgs, Davey, as you know, that send like care packages to families and they are looking for resources. And so the publisher is like, how easy can we make this? And so you can find that at wheredidtjgo.com. There's a link straight to it with the code for bulk buy, and it's 50% off. And then also the other thing is that families really want their children to be remembered by name. We do too. Yeah, we titled the book, Where Did TJ Go? And because we want TJ to be remembered. And so I'm signing book plates in loving memory of. As of this morning, Davey, over 500 families have submitted names for us. And they're free. We just mail them to you. You buy the book and you tell us who you want us to mail it to and what the name you want. And we are writing, as you can imagine, Davey, there are multiple that are like 3 and 4 names. I mean, it's been beautiful and heartbreaking. But if there's a family listening who would like a signed book plate just as a gift from us to put inside your copy of Where Did TJ Go, I'd be happy to do that. So we're signing those left, right, and center for families right now. And so that's all at wheredidtjgo.com.
Wow. We'll make sure we put all the links there right under the YouTube as well as on your podcast platform in the show notes. Annie, Tatum, thank you so much. This has been wonderful spending some time with you guys.
Yeah, thanks for what you do, Davey. It's always an honor to partner with you in anything about the gospel. And good news in the middle of sad stories is the gospel. And so we are really grateful for Nothing Is Wasted in what you do.
Thanks for joining us for today's episode of the Nothing Is Wasted podcast. We hope you enjoyed our conversation and found it as encouraging and insightful as we did. Now, don't forget to subscribe to our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you like to listen, and leave us a rating and review. Your feedback helps us to connect to those who need these stories of hope and healing most, and to reach more listeners just like you. Also, subscribe to our Nothing Is Wasted Ministries YouTube channel. Now be sure to stay connected with us on social media. You can follow us at Nothing Is Wasted Ministries, follow me at Davey Blackburn, and follow Aubrey at AubSam. We'd love to interact with you, so be sure to stop by and let us know how these conversations are impacting you and your story. And if you want to learn more about all the incredible resources we have available to help you navigate whatever valley you're walking through, visit our website at nothingiswasted.com. If you're ready to get started in your journey towards healing and finding purpose in your pain, we'd love to help. Simply go to nothingiswasted.com/start here for your next step. Lastly, a big thank you to Sleeping at Last for providing all the music for the Nothing Is Wasted podcast. We want to thank our guests, and we want to thank you, our Nothing Is Wasted community, for tuning in regularly. Remember, no matter what challenges you face, whatever pain you are walking through, nothing is wasted. We'll see you next time for another incredible conversation here on the Nothing Is Wasted podcast. But before you go, check out this short clip from our next episode. Thanks for joining us, friends.
James Pennebaker, I think is how it's pronounced, was one of the experts on trauma, and specifically because of research. And he wanted to understand, like, why is it that some people face trauma and they actually grow and mature, and some people face it and they tank, go inward, and never heal? Why? And what's the difference? What are the indicators? What are the factors? And this is not a Christian study. This is just a psychological one. And they got all these researchers together, and I think the study was about 40 years long. So they wanted to do one of the first longitudinal studies on the topic. And they all had their guesses at the beginning. So hypothesis number 1 was the indicator is the type of trauma, whether it's relational, physical, emotional, sexual, whatever. The type of trauma will be the indicator. Second person's like, nah, I think it's the depth of the trauma, like the intensity of it. Third person's like, I think my guess is going to be the length of the trauma, and then also the depth, like the how long, how intense. Basically, they all gave their guesses, and at the end of the 40-year, which, by the way, when I've done like experiments, I remember doing in like 8th grade, I feel like you always started with your guess that you knew was right, you know? So
yeah, totally.
This is why everyone was so shocked to find that all the hypotheses were wrong.
No way.
All of them.
Come
because
on.
what they found at the end of the study was the number one indicator of those who grew through trauma instead of tanked because of it were the people that had a community of support to share it with, or they were willing to write it down.